Some women love you while they're alive. Mine loved me so well she arranged my entire future from her deathbed and kept it a perfect secret until I needed it most. Welcome back to Dad's True Revenge. Grab your snacks, get comfortable, and remember, the people in these stories had every chance to behave themselves. They just chose wrong. Drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. You're going to love it here. The morning of Helen's funeral, I wore the blue tie she hated. I don't know why. Maybe because she wasn't there to scrunch her nose and say, "Mark Sutton, you look like a courthouse lawyer from 1987. Maybe I just needed to feel her fuss at me one more time, even if only inside my own head. She didn't fuss. She wasn't there. And the silence in that church was the loudest thing I'd ever heard in 63 years of living. Our son, Reed, sat beside me in the front pew. Tall, broad-shouldered, Helen's jaw and my stubbornness, a dangerous combination as it turned out. He kept patting my knee the way you pat a dog that might bite. Controlled affection. Managed grief. I noticed he checked his phone twice during the eulogy. I said nothing. Helen always said I noticed too much and spoke too little. She said it like it was a flaw. I'm starting to think it was a gift. The days after the funeral blur together the way bad dreams do. People brought casseroles. I ate none of them. Our neighbor, Patrice, a retired school teacher with excellent intentions and absolutely no concept of personal space, came by 3 times in 4 days. On the third visit, she sat across from me at the kitchen table, clasped her hands like she was about to deliver a verdict, and said, "Mark, honey, have you thought about what comes next?" I looked at her over my coffee cup and said, "Patrice, I buried my wife 11 days ago. What comes next is me finishing this coffee." She laughed nervously and brought me a pound cake the following Tuesday. I think it was an apology. It was a good pound cake. But her question burrowed in, the way questions do when they're actually true. What did come next? Here is what I knew. Helen and I had been married 38 years. We'd built a life in this house, a 4-bedroom colonial in Millbrook, Ohio, that had seen birthday parties and arguments, and a leaky roof we fought about for 6 years before finally fixing. We raised Reed here. We grew old here, or at least she grew old here. I was still in the process. What I didn't know, what Helen had been carefully, lovingly, deliberately keeping from me, I was about to find out. 3 weeks after the funeral, I got a call from Gerald Foss, Helen's attorney. Not our attorney, hers. I didn't even know she had one. His voice was careful, the kind of voice built specifically for delivering news that rearranges a person's entire understanding of their own life. He said, "Mr. Sutton, your wife left specific instructions that this conversation happen no sooner than 21 days after her passing. She was very particular about the timeline." I sat down slowly. "That sounds exactly like her," I said. "She left you the entirety of her personal estate, $340,000, held in an account in her name alone. She also left documentation for a property, a cabin, in Tobermory." The room tilted slightly. "I'm sorry. Where?" "Tobermory, Ontario, Canada. Just across the border. She purchased it 4 years ago. Paid cash." 4 years ago, Helen had been diagnosed with early-stage heart disease. 4 years ago, she'd started going on what she called solo weekends. Because, Mark, you snore, and I deserve peace. 4 years ago, I had laughed and handed her the car keys. I sat in that kitchen for a long time after I hung up with Gerald. The pound cake was still on the counter. I looked at it. I looked at the blue tie hanging over the chair where I'd left it. "Helen," I said out loud, to nobody, "what were you doing?" The kitchen didn't answer, but I had a feeling the cabin would. Now, and this is where the story gets complicated, so stay with me, I need to tell you about Reed. Reed was 41, successful at least on paper. He ran a property development firm out of Columbus. Nice suits, firm handshake, the kind of man who says, "Let's circle back," and means it as a quiet threat. He called 6 weeks after the funeral, on a Thursday evening. I was eating soup. He didn't ask about the soup. "Dad, I've been talking to a financial advisor," he started. I put my spoon down. "Have you? The house is too big for one person. You're rattling around in there. Maintenance alone, Reed, is going to run you conservatively $15,000 to $20,000 a year, and with Mom's medical bills still outstanding." "Son," he stopped. "Are you trying to sell my house?" There was a pause. The particular kind of pause that means someone is rearranging words they've already practiced. "I'm trying to make sure you're taken care of, Dad. And there it was, that phrase, taken care of. In my experience, when your adult child says they want to make sure you're taken care of, what they mean is they want to make decisions using your assets while you're still alive to watch. I picked my spoon back up. That's very thoughtful, Reed. I'll keep it in mind. Dad, I'll keep it in mind, I said again, pleasantly. The way Helen used to say things pleasantly when she had already made up her mind and just hadn't announced it yet. I learned it from her. 38 years of marriage is basically a graduate degree in the tactics of the person you love. I hung up. I finished my soup. Then I opened my laptop and started reading about Tobermory. The cabin had a name. Helen had named it. According to the documents Gerald forwarded me, it was registered under the name Blue Heron Cottage, which is exactly the kind of name Helen would choose. Quiet, specific, a little bit show-offy about how much she loved nature. I pulled up photos on Google Maps. Waterfront, surrounded by white birch trees. A porch that looked out over Georgian Bay. It looked like the place where a person could breathe. I'd been having trouble breathing since March. I drove up on a Tuesday. I told no one. I put a bag in the car, gave my spare key to Patrice, who asked 0 questions because somehow she understood this was not a pound cake moment, and I drove north. 6 hours. 2 coffees. 1 gas station sandwich I will not be recommending to anyone. I pulled up to the cabin just after 4 in the afternoon. The sun was doing something extraordinary over the water, the kind of light you can't describe without sounding like a greeting card, so I won't try. I sat in the car for a moment, then I walked to the lockbox where Gerald said the key would be. I punched in Helen's birthday. The box opened. Of course it did. Inside the cabin, everything was clean. Neat. Dishes in the cupboard, a quilt on the couch, a small stack of firewood beside the door. Someone had been maintaining it. I didn't yet know who. Then I saw the kitchen table. On it was a single envelope, my name on the front, in Helen's handwriting, that looping, slightly left-tilting cursive she'd had since college, and never once changed. My hands were not entirely steady when I picked it up. I stood in that kitchen, in a cabin I'd never seen, in a town I'd never visited, holding a letter from my dead wife, and I thought, not for the first time since March, Helen Ann Sutton, you are the most organized woman who has ever lived. I almost smiled. Then I opened the letter. She had written 12 pages, and on page 3, she mentioned a name I had never heard before, a woman named Elise Waverly, and what Helen said about her, in her own handwriting in that looping cursive I would know anywhere, completely stopped my heart. If you've made it this far, do us one quick favor. Subscribe. A lot of people watch without ever doing it, but it costs you nothing and means everything to us. Thank you, genuinely. I read all 12 pages standing up. I don't know why I didn't sit down. Maybe some part of me understood that whatever was in that letter required me to be upright, alert, present in a way that sitting at a kitchen table with a cup of tea simply wouldn't allow. Helen's handwriting was steady throughout. That was the first thing that broke me, the steadiness of it. She had written this knowing exactly what she was doing, knowing exactly where I would be standing when I read it, knowing exactly how my face would look on page 3 when I got to the name. She knew me that well. After 38 years, she could write a letter designed to dismantle me and reassemble me at the same time. Pages 1 and 2 were what I expected. She told me she loved me. She told me about the money, the cabin, why she'd kept it secret. She said she needed to know I would have something that was entirely mine, not ours, not Reed's, not subject to anyone's opinion or financial advice or circling back. She wrote, and I could hear her voice in every single word. You spent 38 years taking care of everyone else in that house, Mark. The leaky roof, my doctor appointments, Reed's college applications that you stayed up 3 nights finishing because he wouldn't. I needed to know that when I was gone, someone was still taking care of you. And since I can't do it myself, and believe me, I tried to negotiate with God on that point and got nowhere. I made other arrangements. I laughed out loud in that empty cabin. Then I turned to page 3. Her name is Elise Waverly. She lives 12 minutes from the cabin, in a house on Cranes Bluff Road. She's 58 years old, widowed 6 years ago, and she is one of the finest human beings I have ever had the privilege of knowing. Before you panic, and I know you, Mark, you are already panicking. Let me explain how this happened. I was absolutely panicking. I kept reading. 4 years ago, the weekend after my diagnosis, I drove up to Tobermory alone. I found the cabin on a listing website, and I made an offer the same day. Because when you're staring down a heart condition at 59 years old, You stop waiting to decide things. I needed a place that was mine, a place I could think. The second weekend I was there, my car got stuck on a gravel road half a mile from the cabin. I had no signal. It was November. Elise drove past, stopped without being asked, and spent 40 minutes helping a complete stranger get unstuck from the mud. Then she invited me in for coffee because it was getting dark, and she said, and I quote, "You look like someone who needs to sit down before they fall down." She was right. I sat down. We talked for 4 hours. I told her about my diagnosis. She told me about losing her husband, Robert. And somewhere in those 4 hours, I made a friend. The real kind. The kind you don't find twice. I sat down now. My legs had apparently made their own decision. Over the next 4 years, Elise and I spent weekends at the cabin together. She helped me furnish it. She has a key. She has been maintaining it for the past 8 months, while I was too sick to travel, because I asked her to, and she did it without once making me feel like a burden. I am telling you this, Mark, because I need you to go find her. Not today, not this week maybe, but soon. Because she knows you. I talked about you constantly, and she has been kind enough to pretend she isn't. Already tired of hearing about the blue tie, and because she is lonely in a way that good people shouldn't be. I am not telling you what to feel or when to feel it. I would never be that presumptuous. I snorted at that. Helen was famously, legendarily presumptuous. I am simply telling you that there is a woman 12 minutes away who already knows your soup preference, your opinion on the designated hitter rule, and the fact that you cried at the end of Toy Story 3 and blamed allergies. She knows these things because I told her, and she listened, and she smiled. The real kind of smile, not the polite kind. All I'm asking is that you knock on her door. The rest is up to you. I folded the letter carefully, put it back in the envelope, placed the envelope on the table exactly where I'd found it, as if I might need to return it to someone. Then I walked out to the porch and sat in one of the 2 chairs facing Georgian Bay. 2 chairs. Of course there were 2 chairs. Helen had bought 2 chairs and placed them side by side facing the water, and never once mentioned it to me. I stared at that second chair for a long time. "You are unbelievable," I told her quietly into the evening air. The water didn't respond, but a blue heron landed on the dock about 30 feet away, stood there for a moment with that particular heron dignity that suggests it owns everything it can see, and then lifted off again. I decided to take that as a response. I did not go to Crane's Bluff Road that night, or the next morning. I unpacked my bag, made coffee with the grounds I found in the cabinet, Helen's brand, of course, and spent the first full day simply existing in the space she had built. I learned the cabin the way you learn a person, slowly, room by room. The quilt on the couch was handmade. I turned a corner and found a small tag that read EW. I stood holding that quilt for longer than I'll admit. The bookshelf in the corner held Helen's paperbacks, her beloved mysteries, 3 dog-eared cookbooks she never actually cooked from, and tucked between 2 of them, a photograph I had never seen. Helen and another woman, standing on this very porch, laughing at something outside the frame. The kind of laugh that's completely unposed, the kind that happens when someone says something genuinely funny and nobody's paying attention to the camera. The woman beside Helen was tall, dark-haired, going silver at the temples, with the kind of face that looked like it had been through things and come out thoughtful rather than hardened. I turned the photo over, on the back, in Helen's handwriting. Blue heron, my 2 favorite things in one place. I put the photo back exactly where I found it. On the 3rd morning I drove to Crane's Bluff Road. I want to be clear. I was not ready. I was a 63-year-old man who had been married to the same woman since Ronald Reagan's 2nd term, who had not introduced himself to anyone new in approximately a decade, and who was now sitting in a parked car outside a pale yellow house with a wraparound porch because his deceased wife had essentially written him a homework assignment. I sat in that car for 22 minutes. I know because I watched the clock. Then the front door of the pale yellow house opened, and a woman stepped onto the porch with a coffee mug. She looked out at the road. She looked at my car. She tilted her head slightly. Then she called out, and her voice carried easily across the quiet morning. "You must be Mark." I rolled down the window. "How did you?" "Helen described your car, and she said you'd sit in it for at least 15 minutes before getting out." A pause. "She gave you more credit than I did. I had 25 minutes in the pool." I got out of the car. She was still smiling when I reached the porch steps. The real kind, not the polite kind, exactly like Helen had written. She extended her hand. Elise Waverly, come in. I just made coffee and I have approximately 4 years of stories about your wife that will make you laugh and cry, probably in the wrong order. I shook her hand. Mark Sutton, I said, which was unnecessary because she already knew, but some habits are hard to break. She held the door open. I stepped inside. And somewhere in the back of my mind, quiet as a heron lifting off a dock, I heard Helen say, "Good, you finally knocked." But what I didn't know yet, what none of us knew, was that Reed had hired someone to find me, and that person had already been to Tobermory once. If you've been listening for a while and want stories like this to keep coming, it really helps if you hit that like button and subscribe. 97% of people never do, but it's what keeps this whole thing running. So thank you for real. Elise made good coffee. I want to establish that immediately, because it matters in the way small things matter when everything large is uncertain. You walk into a stranger's kitchen carrying 12 pages of your dead wife's handwriting and the weight of 3 months of grief, and someone hands you a cup of coffee that is exactly the right temperature and strength. That is not nothing. That is, in fact, everything. We sat at her kitchen table for 3 hours that first morning. She told me about the day she met Helen, the mud, the gravel road, the November cold. She told it the way someone tells a story they've turned over many times, polished smooth from handling. She was standing outside her car looking at the tire like it had personally offended her, Elise said. And when I pulled over, she looked at me and said, "I don't need help. I just need this situation to be different." I thought, I liked this woman immediately. I laughed. A real one. The first real laugh in 3 months, and it surprised me so much I had to set my coffee down. That is, I said the most Helen sentence I have ever heard. Elise smiled into her mug. "She talked about you every single weekend," she said. "Every single one. I know about the leaky roof. I know about the Toy Story incident. That was allergies. Mark. Seasonal. Very aggressive that year." She looked at me with patient, unconvinced eyes and moved on diplomatically. I appreciated that. We talked about Helen the way you talk about someone when you've both loved them. Not with the careful reverence people use at funerals, but with the full, honest picture. The brilliance and the stubbornness. The warmth and the iron underneath it. The way she could make a decision at 7 in the morning and have it fully executed by noon while you were still drinking your first coffee, wondering what day it was. "She planned all of this, didn't she?" I said at some point. It wasn't really a question. Elise nodded slowly. "About 18 months ago, she sat right where you're sitting and she said, 'Elise, I need to tell you something and I need you to hear all of it before you respond.' And I said, 'Helen, that sentence has never once preceded good news.' And she said," Elise paused. Her voice went just slightly careful. She said, "I'm not going to make it to old age. I've known that for a while. But Mark is going to be lost when I go, and I can't leave him lost. So I need you to be there when he finds the cabin. Not immediately, let him breathe, but be there." The kitchen was very quiet. "And you agreed," I said. I told her I was honored. Elise said simply, "And I meant it." I looked out her kitchen window at the birch trees in the yard. White bark, bare branches, early spring light coming through them at an angle that made everything look like it was just beginning. I thought about Helen sitting in this same chair, in this same kitchen, engineering my future with the calm precision she brought to everything she loved. 38 years and she could still surprise me. She was something, I said. She really was, Elise agreed. I went back to the cabin that afternoon. I sat on the porch in my chair. I'd started thinking of it as mine, which felt significant. And I watched the bay go gold in the late afternoon light, and I let myself feel something I hadn't felt since March. Not happy, not yet, but adjacent to it, close enough to see it from where I was standing. I called Patrice. "I found it," I told her. She didn't ask what. She just said good, in the tone of a woman who had been waiting for exactly this phone call. "She planned the whole thing," I said. "Of course she did," Patrice said. "Mark, she reorganized my entire kitchen once while I was at the dentist. Did you genuinely think she wasn't going to reorganize your life?" Over the following 2 weeks, something quiet and unhurried began to happen. Elise and I fell into a rhythm, the way two careful people do when neither of them is rushing. And both of them have been through enough to know that rushing is how you break things. Mornings, I made coffee at the cabin. Some mornings she knocked on the door and I poured a second cup without being asked. Some mornings I walked the trail along the water alone, and that was fine too. We didn't force it. We let it be what it was, which was two people sitting with their grief, and their coffee, and the particular beauty of Georgian Bay in early spring, not needing it to be anything more than that. She showed me which trail had the best view at sunrise. I fixed the loose board on her porch steps that had apparently been loose for 2 years. She cooked dinner on a Thursday, lake trout simply done, and I washed the dishes after, and we argued pleasantly about whether garlic belonged in everything. Her position was yes. My position was also yes, but I enjoyed the argument. Helen would have found this hilarious. And then, on a Tuesday morning, 3 weeks into what I had started privately thinking of as my actual life, my phone rang. It was Gerald Foss. His careful voice was more careful than usual. "Mark, I need to give you a heads up about something. Reed has been in contact with my office." I set down my coffee. "Okay, he's retained a lawyer in Columbus. They've filed a preliminary motion to contest the structure of Helen's estate, specifically the private account and the property. His position is that the assets should have been jointly disclosed during the marriage and are therefore subject to equitable distribution as part of the estate." The morning went very still. "He's trying to take the cabin," I said. "He's trying to establish that he has a claim to a portion of Helen's private estate, yes, including, potentially, the property." I stood up from the porch chair. I walked to the railing and looked out at the water, and I took one long, slow breath. "Gerald," I said, "can he do this?" Another careful pause. "He can file. Whether he succeeds is a different matter. But Mark, there's something else." "Of course there is." Helen anticipated this possibility. "There is a second document. I was instructed not to disclose it unless a legal challenge was filed against the estate." I closed my eyes. "She left a second document. A comprehensive one," Gerald said, and I could hear something in his voice that might, in a less careful man, have been described as admiration. 17 pages, notarized, witnessed by 2 independent attorneys. It details every transaction, every purchase decision, the medical and financial reasoning behind the private account, and a specific clause addressing any challenge from a family member. "What does the clause say?" Gerald cleared his throat, in Helen's own words, and I'm quoting directly here. "In the event that my son Reed challenges this estate rather than honoring it, the full balance of the personal account is to be donated to the Georgian Bay Land Trust in my name, removing it entirely from family consideration. The property passes to Mark unconditionally regardless. I would prefer Reed simply be gracious, but I have met Reed, and so I prepared for this outcome." I stood on that porch for a long moment. A blue heron sailed low over the water below me, unhurried, magnificent, completely unbothered by the affairs of the Sutton family. "She wrote that," I said. "She actually wrote, 'I have met Reed.'" "Verbatim," Gerald confirmed. I started laughing. I laughed until my eyes watered, standing on the porch of a cabin I never knew existed, with the bay glittering below me, and my wife's voice in my ear from 17 pages beyond the grave, still the sharpest person in any room she'd ever been in. "Send Reed the document, Gerald," I said when I could speak again. "Already done. 40 minutes ago." "Good," I said. "Let him sit with that." Reed called that evening. I was at Elisa's kitchen table. She read the room immediately, stood up quietly, and took her wine out to the porch, pulling the door half closed behind her. I mouthed, "Thank you." She waved it off. "Dad." Reed's voice was different. The boardroom edges had been sanded down. "Reed, I didn't know about the document." "I know you didn't." A long pause. "She really wrote that, about having met me." "She did." Another pause, and then something I didn't expect. Reed made a sound that was almost a laugh. Short, reluctant, and completely genuine. "That's so, Mom," he said quietly. And there it was, under the suits and the financial advisors and the circling back, my son, 41 years old, missing his mother. "Yeah," I said. "It really is." The silence between us shifted. Still complicated. Still with things in it that needed time. But different. "Are you okay up there?" he asked finally. "I'm getting there," I said honestly. "Is there someone?" He stopped. Started again. "Gerald mentioned you hadn't been alone at the cabin." I looked out through the half-open door at Elise on the porch, her wine glass in one hand, watching the last light leave the water. "There's someone," I said. "Your mother knew her. She approved." The longest pause yet. "Of course she did," Reed said softly. Not angry, not wounded. Just recognizing his mother and the architecture of it, the planning, the love expressed as logistics. "I'd like to come up," he said, "when you're ready." No lawyers, no financial advisors. Just come up. When you're ready, I said. The porch fits 3. I went outside after I hung up. Elise moved over without being asked. I sat in my chair. We didn't speak for a while. Just watched the dark come in over the bay, the first stars appearing one by one like they had something to prove. You good? She asked eventually. Getting there, I said. Same answer I'd given Reed. Truer every time I said it. She nodded, took a sip of her wine. A loon called somewhere out on the water, that long wavering sound that means either profound peace or profound longing, and maybe both at once. Helen told me something once, Elise said quietly. She said, I'm not afraid of dying. I'm afraid of leaving him without a reason to stay interested in things. I didn't say anything. I think she solved that, Elise said. I looked out at the water, at the stars, at the porch light of the pale yellow house 12 minutes down the road that I now knew how to get to without the GPS. I thought about a woman who had loved me well enough to plan my life after hers, who had found me a friend in the mud on a November road, who had written 17 pages of legal armor and hidden them with a lawyer just in case, who had put 2 chairs on a porch facing the most beautiful water I'd ever seen and waited patiently for me to find my way to the second one. Yeah, I said. I think she did. Somewhere out on Georgian Bay, the loon called again, and for the first time since March, I called back into the dark, I'm good, Helen. I'm good. If you like this story, join our community by hitting that like button and subscribing for more real, raw, and family-centered stories. And as always, thank you for being a part of this sphere.